Okay, Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1. We're up to the middle of page Reish Nun Beis, 252. It's the middle of chapter 130, Discourse 32. Shvuas Ayin Gimel. I think after all those descriptions, it should be pretty clear where we are. At least physically, that is. Spiritually is another story. So where are we spiritually? Let's see. So the Rebbe Rashab is discussing two tracks of energy that are within existence. One is an energy called Er Pnimi, or Er Mamala, or Er Hagvul. In simple English, you can call it targeted, focused energy, immanent energy, which permeates and energizes each diverse aspect of existence. And then we have Er Makif, or Er Seviv, or Er Habligvul. We'll call that transcendent energy that does not penetrate and is not internal integrated energy. It's more of a hovering energy. When I say hovering, not physically, it means it is it's a force that is transcendent, and it's discussing the impact of both these energies. Obviously, the key to the interface of existence with that which is beyond existence, basically between existence and the divine, these two energies play a critical role because one, they're both divine, but one is more commensurate to the structure of existence, and the other one is more reflective of the source. So like in any intermediary, when you have a translator, you want to have someone that speaks both languages. So basically, Er HaBligvul speaks more the language of Elikus, divine. Er HaGvul speaks more the language of existence. But Er HaGvul, let's not forget, is still Er, it's still divine energy. It's not containers, and it's definitely not our perception where we don't even recognize that there is any energy altogether. Because we live our lives on this level here, purely on the surface level. But within existence, you can discover that inner energy, and when you go deeper, you discover the transcendent energy. And the big part of Ayin Beis, the beginning, I would say the last few hundred pages, from the beginning, was discussing how these two energies exist, what their role is, and how they interact with each other. Because of course the key mysterious challenge, mystery is where does Gvul meet Blikvul? And where does the finite energy meet the infinite energy, so to speak? So where we're going now is going further into the subject matter, and he discussed at length that in the infinite, meaning Keser, or Er Ein Sof, you also have the beginnings of the structured energy, because the same energy, the same Er Ein Sof that has infinite possibilities, chose one possibility, that would be called 10 spheres. So 10 spheres is the operative word for structure, for building blocks. 10 spheres consist of containers, that would be the identities of the building blocks, and the energies of the building blocks would be considered to be the force that energizes them, their deeper meaning, their deeper power.
10 spheres are Pnimi?
Yes, always a Pnimi. That's by definition 10 spheres Pnimi.
And the Kelim?
Kelim and Eris. Eris and Kelim. And then there is beyond the 10, in their root there are the 10 hidden spheres, and higher than that is the infinite energy. Sometimes that's where spheres and Ketz reside, meaning infinite possibilities of spheres. And not only infinite amount of spheres, but also each sphere itself cannot be even defined as a sphere. So it's in every possible way, all the possibilities possible. So now in the last few chapters been discussing how the impact, what's the role of the Er HaBligvul. So he says his primary role is to reveal. If the Er HaGvul's primary role is to create and to bring into reality a defined structure, the primary role of Er HaBligvul is to reveal the divine, to elevate the world. You can also say to sublimate the world, which is the concept of bittul. But then he asks the question, doesn't Er Pnimi also affect bittul in the world? Because it's also a recognition when you're aware that, for example, God blesses you with parnasa, God blesses you with the food you eat, with health, and so on. This is also a recognition of the divine. It also evokes a bittul. So why do you need to have Er HaBligvul? You need to know that God is beyond existence. So he began by answering by saying that even the bittul that Er HaPnimi brings also comes from Er HaBligvul. And the case he makes for it is because Er HaGvul ultimately is subject to the gradations and the diminishments and the tzimtzumim of the regular flow, because it's a creator. It's like an instrument whose role is to shape things. So, as such, every level has its level. Atzilus is Atzilus and Biyah is Biyah. So there's glimmers of Atzilus that go into Biyah. There's glimmers of a higher level entering a lower level. But that's all. All you get is a glimmer. All you get is a reflection. So therefore you get something that becomes existent. To create bittul requires more than just the regular flow of energy. Bittul requires something that is a little more than the regular, and that originates from the bligvuldik energy. Like I discussed, for example, a healthy human being is eris and kalim. Your faculties, the energy of your faculties, which comes from the soul, is residing in a seamless way, flowing into your containers, into your eyes, into your ears, into your heart, to your brain, into whatever, your entire body. That's called health, eris and kalim. What would be an example of era makif in our beings? Ratzon, desire. It doesn't have a place it resides, but it's a way like a captain of the ship. So in a sense, hovers. What does it mean, hovers? You desire something, you can't identify where does desire come from. It doesn't come from the brain, it doesn't come from the heart. It comes from the soul. It's the soul's nitiyah, inclination. The inclination to think, the inclination to walk, the inclination to talk, to eat. That's Ratzon. So Ratzon is more reflective of the soul's energy, and the faculties are more reflective of the structure of the soul, how the soul implements, or acts out, or lives out its life. Now, when there's regular health, there's a flow of eris and kalim. But God forbid, when there's something missing, or there's a blockage, you need to have an additional surge. And that requires reaching deeper into so-called the soul. It's not the regular flow is enough. So basically, bittul, even the bittul that pnimi affects in existence, it says also comes from the habligvul. This was in chapter 129. And now the classic example he gave for this so-called a regular flow, and beyond the regular flow would be before Matan Torah, there was a gzeira, there was a decree that separated the heavens from earth. So basically, Atzilus could not come into Biyah as is, only in a diminished way, as he discussed at length. How the containers of Atzilus become the energies of Biyah, and so on and so forth. Essentially, think of it as as I said, a monitored flow. As it descends, it gets diminished. Then you have Matan Torah. Matan Torah says abolishes the decree, and now Ayin yardu lamata, and tachtenim yardu lamayla. That which is below can ascend, and that which is above can descend. That essentially is piercing the curtain, the parsa, like he spoke before about Yaakov, who prepared the ground, piercing the curtain, and this already is allowing a bligvuldik energy enter into existence. So Matan Torah was not just gvul. Now to understand this, he began to explain Kuf Lamed, where we're learning now. So to understand this, we have to understand the difference between the Hamshacha, between the divine revelation and transmission that the Avos, the patriarchs, achieved, and this what Matan Torah achieved, which of course is a watershed moment in history in general, especially in Jewish history, the Torah. Matan Torah is a significant event. So even though the Chumash has an entire Sefer that talks completely about the Avos, doesn't even mention Matan Torah yet, the whole period of history, beginning obviously from Adam, but primarily the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and then comes the whole new episode where everything changes with Matan Torah and Pasha Sefer Shmos, Pasha Yisro. So, what is the difference between them? So, it's captured in one pasuk. Ve'era ela Avos. Pasuk says in the Pasha, Ve'era, and he says, Shmi b'shem, there was the Lashon, Bekel Shaddai. Shmi avay leine daiti lahem. So the pasuk says right away, he's telling Moshe Rabbeinu, the Eibush is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, I revealed myself a Kel Shaddai, but Shmi avay did not reveal myself, did not make myself aware the Shem Havaya to them. Now this, interestingly, is a pasuk that you don't, without even Rashi, it's clearly impossible to understand without some Primis HaTorah. What does this mean? I mean, just a name, what's the difference? Clearly this pasuk symbolizes. It's like, for me, I always, whenever someone says, well, how do you know this Kabbalah is from the Torah? I say, this is the Kabbalah of Kabbalah is in this pasuk. It's a clear pasuk. It's almost impossible to understand without some deeper understanding that there's divine levels. Because basically he's saying, there's me as I manifest in Kel Shadei, there's how God manifests in Havaya. So the question is, don't we find Havaya also by the others? And he cites the pasuk by the Bris Milah, that he said, what was the pasuk? Ani Kel Shadei, what did he say? No, he doesn't bring a pasuk. Sorry, we find the name Havaya also by the Avos. So he says you have to say based on this pasuk that even the Havaya that was revealed to the Avos was also Kel Shadei. He doesn't explain why, but he just says you have to say that because that's what the pasuk is saying. It can't contradict itself. The pasuk says I did not reveal myself in Shem Havaya. So to explain this, the Brasha begins with the Gemara. What does Shadai mean? So the Gemara says that Shadai means, and also in Medrash, Shadai means Shamarti Leilami Dai. Shadai comes from the word Dai. Dai. Dai means enough. So essentially, Dai is a name, a divine name that reflects the concept of restraint. When you say enough, you're saying you're stopping something. You're saying something is flowing, and they're saying enough. Ad kan. Enough. So he explains, he asks the question, the Medrash continues, because had God not said die, the world would have continued to extend. There's a lashon out here that he says, that it would continue to extend and spread till this day. In other words, it would have been like a flow. God said a flow, and that would just continue to flow and flow and flow.
The Rakia would continue to stretch.
So he asked the question, we know the klal, the rule is that nothing gvul can go bli gvul. So how could there be such a consideration that a structured, defined world, finite entity, should go on forever? So the answer is based on the Sharichet V'Amunah, that we're not talking about the defined entity. We're talking about the divine energy in the finite. Because the Sharichet V'Amunah says that all of existence is the divine energy that emanates and energizes everything in existence. That's what we're talking about. That energy, if God did not say die, would continue to flow, and yet in Chanami there'd become no yesh. A yesh wouldn't be able to emerge. And to explain it, he goes back to the Shaykh Ramunah Perik Dalit. What does he say there? Talks about the two descriptions we use for God. We say Hagadol v'Hagibur. Gadol is Chesed and Gibur is Gevura. So Gadol discusses God's greatness, His magnitude, His ability to give. Chesed. What's Chesed? Chesed is the ability to just give, to flow. If that would just continue on and on, like he brings from Shaykh Ramunah, that would not allow existence to really take hold. So that's why says, like he says, because love, the flow of chesed, of kindness, nothing would stop it. There would be nothing to restrain it. Midas Gvura imposes a restraint, a type of control, like a valve, where it stops the flow from going. And therefore, and also conceals it. And that's why the Guf HaNivra, the entity called the structure of existence, can emerge, because now the flow has been slowed down or stopped, enough, die, and also been concealed. Even though in truth, it's still the energy of the divine that's within it. So Gvura is not just a physical stopping. Gvura is basically also a type of withholding that the entity can exist because the flow is not what's dominating. So you have an entity that is a yesh, a mitzias. Even though in truth it's also divine energy, like he says there in Shaykh Ramunah, hein hein gvuresav. Because even the break, even the die, the enough is also a divine force. Okay. So there he says, we learned this, I'm just reviewing it. I'm reading the bottom of page Reish and Aleph. And we say that it says in the Medrash, that he says to the world enough, doesn't mean the world itself. Because the world cannot be bli gvul. Talking about the divine reflection He says enough. He's saying enough that the reflection, the air should flow in a finite way. Now he continues and says, what is in the root of roots? What is the first place where Shaddai is employed? Where is its first application in existence? The first root is at Tzimtzum Harishon. Because before that, he says, divine energy, like I just said, like Chesed, Hagadol, was everywhere, was all-encompassing, was omnipresent. Everything was Ein Sof. And the Tzimtzum was a die. It stopped the flow, it concealed the flow, it withdrew, he says. Like we've learned many times, and I'll repeat it again, that before the Tzimtzum, you have, yes, God wants to have a world. He even originates conceptually the concept of Kelim, which are letters. But there, everything is submerged in a complete divine, all-encompassing, omnipresent, and omnipotent energy. The Tzimtzum, think of it like an ocean that fills the entire existence, like it was in the beginning of creation, actually. And then pull away the ocean, and suddenly the things that were there, but they were not recognizable, emerge. The difference is with the physical ocean, the objects were there before too. Here, before the Tzimtzum, nothing was there. But conceptually, the idea can be understood that once you so-called conceal the light, which is the Tzimtzum, which is Shaddai, in its first action, what remains is the so-called the Eisis Harashimu, is the words. It really means the impression of the letters that God wants to create the world with. However, they're inanimate. Then comes a kav, think of it like a ray of light, or in this case like water enters into this vacuum, and everything starts coming alive. So the kav begins to shape existence. But it's interacting with the kelim, the root of the kelim, we can call them, the issues, the impression that remain after the tzimtzum.
What do you need the shimu?
Because then you don't have a structure. It's like, what do you need letters on a page? Why don't you just convey the idea without letters? The idea can be a structured idea, but without letters you have nothing to hold. It's like the holder.
The kav is not doing it?
Why don't you think in this world, what would be energy without containers, tell me? It wouldn't be a world like ours. It would be defined energies, chesed, gvura, but it would not have nowhere to be held. Think on a physical level.
So initially the cup is already...
You could have wine, but if you don't have a cup to hold the wine in, you can't do anything with it.
The cup is not the cup?
What?
The cup is already the cup.
The cup is the wine, not the cup. Cup is energy. All it is energy. It's like electricity without a light bulb. That's what it's like. Use example. There's a real example. Examples in this world. You need energy, you need a container. Now the container also ultimately is a divine creation. But a container is inanimate without energy.
The Rishim was not the container. The container is...
The Rishim is the root of the containers, yes. The Rishim is the root of the containers. So Rishim is Sheresh Hakem. That's the whole purpose of it. It's letters. It's like you're born with letters in your soul, but a child can't express them yet. When they turn 2-3 years old, they don't suddenly get letters from somewhere. It's coming from somewhere. They have enough seichel, and then they start expressing themselves in words. So every expression is an energy and a container. There's no such thing as something one without the other. A container without an energy is like a corpse. An energy without a container is like a soul without a body. So everything is like that. Nothing exists without Eir and Keli.
If it's Kalim, did it come from the guru that came, the dye, or did it come from was it left over?
Well, he's not talking about the Kalim here. He's talking about the energy.
So the Chesed was weaker than...
Here we're talking about everything in Eir. The Eir HaChesed and Eir HaGvura. We're not talking Kalim here.
Okay, so there was...
Basically, there was Eir and Sof filled everything that's Hagdula.
Right.
And without saying stop, exactly that. It stretches out there's no limits. Then came at Tzimtzum, the Koyach at Tzimtzum, to conceal energy.
Right.
A teacher able to conceal comes from Shaddai. That's the power of Gvura.
Okay, so the Gevura was less strong than the Chesed because it left something still in this case? Before yesterday you said that it was actually comes from...
No, it has nothing to do with... No, one second.
It left something.
The Gvura has nothing to do with left. The left is but left is not energy. It's an impression of letters, basically.
That were there before.
That were, well, not there physically, but they were there conceptually there.
Within the bleak rule over there.
There was the will for them to be there.
Oh, so left something of the
No energy. There's no energy left. There's no energy. It's a black hole. You ask me what Eis Yisrael Rishima are? It's an impression of, Rishima means an impression, or like a residue. A residue of letters.
It didn't come from Chesed, didn't come from Gevurah, so where did it come from?
Keich HaGvul of Elikus. The power of God to create Gvul.
Right? Which is within the bleak rule.
No, not even talking about that. That's Eir HaGvul. We're talking about the Keich HaGvul. We're talking about the containers. There's Eir HaBlikvul, there's Eir HaGvul, and there's containers. They're three completely separate things.
But the Rishim,
I've said it many times. There's three tracks. There has to be three. There's two things are air. There's air and kalim. But in air, there's air habligvul and air hagvul. And then there's the kalim, which is the keich hagvul.
Okay, so
there's entire. I refer to you. 1 second. I refer. There's two whole chapters where the Rebbe Rashav discusses just this alone. So
but in terms of
you ask me. 1 second. We could, if you want, we can relearn those chapters. But let me just tell you where they are. So you'll know. Why don't you mark it down? Because this, he asked me a question that he talks about. You don't need my wisdom here. Here,
YouTube number.
in chapter 16, and then again, I think it's 27. 2 chapters. He talks at length about this question. What is Eir HaGvul? What's Keich HaGvul? What's the difference between Kalim and Eiris? But that's why I said, let's not go into heaven. Let's speak on earth. You understand? There's a light bulb. There's a light in the bulb, and then there's a light that's outside of the bulb that can't even fit into a bulb. Make sense? Those are the 3 levels we're talking about. Where are they rooted? So one is Keich HaGvul, God's power to create finite an entity. But he wants to do it with an order. Take a body and a soul. The soul doesn't create the body. Right? Proof is because after death, the soul leaves, the body's still there. So it says, Kegufid b'lei nishmasa. Like it says in the Paschal Yok, Ishtayre Kegufid, when Eiris are without Kalim, Kalim without Eiris is Kegufid, Ishtayre Kegufid b'lei nishmasa. Think of letters on a page, on a paper, on right here, A, B, C, D, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, random. No ideas, just letters. That's Kalim. That originates in a Keich HaGvul, that just like God has the power to create Bligvul, is the power to create Gvul. Then there's energy. Energy is a divine force. That's like a soul. It gives energy, it reveals, it brings things into being. So what would a body be without a soul? It could exist, but it would not be alive. But God wants them also to work with each other. So the baby that's conceived, the newborn is conceived, it begins to grow soul and body together. The soul brings out so-called the bodily features. And as they learn to acclimate with each other, they grow together. Upon death, you recognize that they're clearly 2 separate entities. But upon life, you can't even distinguish where your soul begins and your body begins. Because it's all like a hand and a glove. But it is a hand and a glove. Follow? Just like letters, and the idea in the letters, even though they're like a hand and a glove, when you read them, they all are joined, but they are not really one entity. They are separate entities. Make sense so far? So all this originates before the Tzimtzum, the same thing. There was energy, and there was the root of containers, and there was energy. As long as the energy dominates, the containers cannot emerge. So you need to have the concealment of the energy. The Chiddush in Beis is that the energy has another level, Eir HaGvul. Because you could say, you know what, you have Eir HaBlikvul and you have containers. The Eir HaBlikvul will diminish it, and then it will fit into containers. But the air fundamentally doesn't have any structure. Like liquid that is colorless, that is shaped and colored by different colored containers. There is such an opinion. But in this Drush, he doesn't go with this opinion. He goes with a more complicated opinion, which is that also the energy has, not just Blikvul, there's also energy that has subtly elements in it that will make it fit into the containers. Now, all opinions hold the energy will enter in containers. The only question is, does the energy have any personality that's similar to the containers, or is it completely like bringing, like I said, colorless liquid into colorful glasses? So that you got it now? So the Rishima is the remainder of the containers. It's an impression of letters that will become ultimately containers once the energy enters into it. Imagine God sent a soul down, but there was no conception called an egg fertilized by a seed. Where would the soul reside? So husband and wife unite, right? Basar Echad. They create the Keli, And then God says, I shall bless this, the third partner, with a neshama. So you have egg and seed fertilized, and you have a soul that enters, and now they work together. One without the other wouldn't work. We don't believe in immaculate conception.
But why is the Tzimtzum not enough? What do you need the Rishimu? The Tzimtzum is already considered...
Because like I just told you, I keep saying to you, what would you do without a light bulb? You can conceal, you can diminish energy to the finest point, but you don't have somewhere for it to hold. You need an identity of a structure. God wants tachtenim. You're right. If you wanted a world of energy, then you wouldn't need it. But He doesn't want a world of energy. It's like, to put it more bluntly, when you go, let's say, for an investment or fundraising, and the guy says to you, my heart is with you, I love your idea, I'm going to tell all my friends about it. But you don't leave with a check. What does that tell you? All the energy is there, but it's the keli nicht. Right? So in this world there's an element of that. Now it's a whole other discussion how physicality comes into being, but this is really somewhat of a tangent, but we can explain it again and again. I know if you ask this again, the only way you're going to master this is if you learn it inside again and again and again. Is it clear, or is it still not clear?
Is impression. How I understand everything what you say.
I just want to know. So you asked me a question. One second. Are we going back to what I said before, or are you going further? No, everything I said you understood.
Yeah.
What's missing? What's missing?
You said that you need the kelim. I understand that. How is this connected to Rishimu? Rishimu means impression. Impression of what?
Of letters in God's mind of what kind of structure existence He wants. He wants a chesed, a gvura, a teferes, Demim, Shemeya, Chai, Medaber. Whatever you see in existence didn't come from nowhere. Someone envisioned it. An artist envisioned it. So there's two parts of the envisioning. There's the energy part, which is the idea behind it. And then there's the structure part. So you can have, for example, a brilliant artist that has great ideas, but he can't get... right now, for example, you ever try to make a face on a piece of paper? Most of us can't do it, right? But you can envision. I see your face. Why can't I sit down and just make it? Because you don't have rishimu, you don't have kelim. You have the idea, but you can't get it into a structure. So that God has to. So the rishima, it means impression of those aces. That's essentially what He's talking about. The root of kelim. That's what it's called. The root of the containers.
I can only understand that it's chesed and gvura that we've been speaking about.
But He's not talking about this. Here He's talking about chesed and gvura. Not in kelim.
Okay, so in other words, this was not the first two processes. That's what I think too.
So the er habligvul. That's what we're saying. There's er chesed.
Some levels before that. In other words, right?
Before what?
Before the chesed and the die that you're talking about today and yesterday.
I don't know if it's before or
there were levels higher that came down before the chesed.
I don't know what that means.
You're talking about the first
Can you tell me what level you're talking about?
We're talking about the first 2 days here we're talking about the first 2 days of creation. What
are you saying? I don't know what you're saying. He's talking about the Tzimtzum Arishin and Er Ein Sof. There's nothing higher than that.
There's nothing higher than that. So it's not like Sunday and Monday, which you had.
That's later. That's in creation. This Sunday, okay. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I used as an example. I didn't use it as this. I didn't speak about it here. First of all, we're talking now the Sherish. We're talking about the root.
Synonymous with Chesed and Monday synonymous with
That's correct. But I would say comes later. We're talking now how it's all in the original state. Once it's not Silas, you can say that Chesed, Gvur, and Tiferes.
So there's another process besides this type.
Look, that's why I say Sherish. No. You have. He spoke about Havai and Shaddai. It's usually in Atzilus. Now we went to the root of it all. Where did it all begin? So it begins that Er Ein Sof was Gdula, Gadol. Then there's a Tzimtzum. One second, he's going to go back to it. We're going to go back to this. We're going back to Sunday, Monday. I use Sunday, Monday, Tuesday as an example. But I wouldn't use it. If you want Sunday, Monday, Tuesday example here, Sunday would be the Er Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum. Tzimtzum would be Yom Sheni. And the Kav is Yom Shlishi, if you want it that way. You could say that too.
How does Rishimu fit into that scheme?
Rishimu is not discussed. Rishimu is an aside.
In terms of the days, he's asking, who's the Rishimu?
The Rishimu is that how could anything come later if it wasn't originated before?
Yeah, right. So it's Sunday night.
No?
The primordial Sunday and Monday, there's something else that made the Rishimu. That's the point.
I told you, Koyach HaGvul of Ein Sof.
Right.
The God's power to create Gvul.
So you detect Gvul.
That's not necessarily higher.
You need to mesh it with this. That's all.
We say that the Rishimu is La'achar Tzimtzum. according to this, the Shema should be even before.
The Shema is after the Tzimtzum. It's the impression.
False.
Yeah, it was there, but it didn't emerge before.
Move the
Once
candle
it's in
down.
something, then
Right,
Okay.
right. That's the hook. That's what I'm getting.
Okay, so then it says, so v'haya tzimtzum, kol b'ir risharak l'shimu k'dei li yasher shel yisavas b'chinas blal gvul. So then he says, now on a lower level, u'bayel matzilus u'inyan miyu ta'er v'ri b'akelim shuzah ikar atikum, which we also learned. So, now on a lower level, where does this manifest? In Atzilus, that's what Atzilus is. Atzilus is you have the Ribi Ha'er, Mir Ta'er, Ribi Ha'kelim. So what do you have? You have the Shaddai is very effective in Atzilus because it's telling the energy to stop enough so the Kelim should be able to emerge. If you have an overflow of energy, the Kelim cannot emerge. It says that's connected. And tell you, the B'teyu Ha'yari Ba'er Va'kelim Ha'yari B'miyut Le'yechel L'chei Nishberu. In Tayu, there was overabundance of energy, and the containers were diminished, so they couldn't contain. They couldn't tolerate. They couldn't contain them. Couldn't contain them. That's why they shattered. And Tikkun is the opposite. So think of Tayu as a surge of energy. You could even say, I'm not going to say bligvul energy, but a surge of energy, and the containers, the students or whoever it is that's supposed to contain, are overwhelmed. In Tikkun, it's balanced. It's what's the word I want to use? Miyushav, measured, balanced. So that's in Tikkun.
Why did you need it to you?
It's another discussion. It's not for this minor.
Okay.
I have discussed this also as well here. She'er b'miyut v'akelim b'srachvus, that the energy is diminished and the containers are expanded. And many break down, many diverse containers for one energy, and through that in Niskaimu they are sustained. Interesting, the Kudi adds here, they says many kelim for one eir. Yeah, because in the Tikkun two things happen. Number one is the Eir Keli, let's say Eir Chesed and the Klei Chesed. The Eir Chesed is weaker, the Klei Chesed is more abundant, so they can work with each other. In addition, it says that there are many Kelim in Atzilus, more than just 10. Because every level has itself, breaks into many, many levels. So Chesed itself can end up having 10 Kelim. Because there's Gvura Sheba Chesed and Tefer Sheba Chesed. So think of it like, you're talking about, think of a body. So a body, you can say there's a head, a body, and legs. But you think about it, a body doesn't have 3 containers. It doesn't even have 10 containers. We have thousands of containers. 248 organs. So generally speaking, it's called 10. But it really comes down to that you have a partzuf. A body is a full body structure where everything is what's the word I want to use? There's a certain balance.
Symmetry.
There's a balance going on. So even if, let's say, an extra flow of energy enters your body has a way of diffusing it, or what's the word of directing it, right? Whereas, for example, let's say suddenly a bright flash of light comes your way, your eye will adjust, and it has the ability to not just be overwhelmed by something. So we have enough containers to
Regulate.
there's also regulate, but also to it's like a resilience that allows things to be absorbed properly in a proper type of balanced way. So that's when it says when there's a lot of kelim. So it's not very common. You're going to see this expression.
What's the Urachah?
Whatever there is, a chesed,
This is a result of all these
This is a result of Shaddai. Shaddai at work that's what it's telling. It's telling the energy slow down or stop enough, and allowing the container to absorb. It's almost like a teacher, when the Eibishter teaches Moshe Rabbeinu, it says there's a hefsek ben parsha to parsha. He has to stop. Someone says, please stop right now. I need to absorb. It's like the raindrops. What makes the rain? Rain would fall down like in just chesed. It would flood the fields. Rev teva ein yichel l'kabel. Gvura, Shaddai, tells it to stop. Not stop completely, come in drops. So it's absorbed, and then it can have more. It's the measure, it's the monitor, it's like a monitor, a valve, a temperer, it tempers the flow. These are correct words. It's actually the key to all real communication, all key to anything. When you read about the first transistors or in technology, one of the big challenges was they had a lot of energy that they couldn't contain it. Even a nuclear reactor. Why do you have all this, what's the big problem of a nuclear reactor? Meltdown. What's a meltdown? Because the coolants, which are supposed to contain the heat, break down. So everything, whatever you have, if you don't have a Shaddai at work, you got big trouble, basically. Now, if you don't have the Chesed, obviously you don't have anything. But you need to have the energy, and you need to have a big part of technologies are all the cooling off or the tempering of the energy that's flowing. Yeah, absolutely. It's everywhere you turn, you're going to find this. It's a critical component. Sometimes more work is put into that than in the original. Until they developed exact fans to make sure that a computer doesn't overheat. It's a whole thing. It's not that simple, because to create energy is also a chiddush, but to make sure that it doesn't overheat and doesn't overwhelm is a major element in this.
Today they don't have fans anymore. The iPads, they don't have fans.
So that's a big feat. They have something else that counters. There's no such thing as heat coming off if someone's not countering. They have, I think, certain chemicals, there's certain substances that absorb, Obviously, if you generate also less energy, you can manage it. I'm not sure how it works with iPads.
Going more to the roots. So you don't need the fans, you have different methodology.
So this is Shem Shad Natzilus. We spoke Shem Shad, and its root is the first symptom. Shem Shadi Natzilus is Mechinis Mir Ta'er, it's the diminishing of the energy, Be'efir Shia Bechinis Estapshis Ba'kelim, in a way that it should manifest in the containers. Ba'kelim Bechinis is Sachvus, and the containers should be expanded. Shikablu Se'er V'yagbilu V'yalimu Be'sei, that they should receive the energy, they should limit it, confine it, V'yalimu, and conceal. So through that they can benefit from the energy. So it's the wisdom of that type of monitoring and gauging, monitoring the flow. This
Even
is
in Eir Gvul, you need the kelim.
He didn't say that right here. He's just talking now what Shaddai means. He says that the Elokus, Gvura, Gedula, that God's Chesed, which flow forever, would not be able to create. You need Shaddai to stop at that. Coming to explain all with the Ovis. What means that God revealed himself with Kel Shaddai to the Ovis. That's what he's coming to explain. Because it's good, lignes, to conceal it, what do you mean he saw that it was good? Why do I think it wasn't good? Because he saw it was good, it was measured. It was tempered, it was concealed to be able to manifest and be contained in the containers.
Done.
Kitoiv lignois?
Rashi says lignois
That's a likin.
There's twice places. Sometimes it says lignos tzadikim, sometimes it just says lignos, period. But the point here is, and this is the meaning of the word tikkun. Why was the world called tikkun? We call tikkun elam, repair of the world. So repair doesn't just mean to fix. Tikkun means to perfect.
Repel. Yeah.
I just said not repair, not to fix.
Repel.
Prepare.
The fashion one also.
Yeah, it's to what did I just say? To perfect, to adorn, to do everything necessary to make it complete. The Ayin hatikun shakelim yalbishu sa'er. That's why you say tikkunim. They compare it to kishutin, to like jewelry. So we're not talking about jewelry that's just overabundant and just ostentatious. You're talking about something that enhances the entity to the point that's even invisible. Like good. Not that I put on makeup, but makeup. If you see that it's makeup, it's not really a good sign. It's supposed to be enhance the features that are there already. So that means tikkun. Like when you say tikkun hakeli, you're not just tikkun, not just fixing a broken thing. You're taking even if it's all intact, you're beautifying it and bringing out its best features. Its fullest features. Ayin tikkun shakelim yalbishu, which is interesting. The Targum says lo yilbash enesh is simla sisha. He says lo yilbash lo yistakin. In other words, it almost explains why. Because what's wrong with a man putting on a woman's clothing? What's really the problem there? Talking about tznius, what's the real problem? Because the clothing is supposed to bring out the person who's wearing it. You're not just putting on. For a woman, her clothing is what brings out the woman in her. For a man to do that, he's being misaking himself with a woman's clothes. It's like a complete wrong identity type of thing. So it brings out deeper. It's not just so what you put on. So you put on a woman's dress.
It is interesting because it's not the pshat.
The Targum does say he's taken, however.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing.
He's taken. He should not
adorn himself with that. He shouldn't correct himself. Basically, he shouldn't express himself that way. That's really what it is.
Rashi seems to ignore that. He said,
Fine, there's Targum. He brings the Targum. It doesn't contradict one or the other. I mean, there are probably several reasons. I don't remember in Halacha. What's not the reason?
Is it
because you shouldn't go between the women.
You'll be able to hang around with women. And
okay, that's an apostolic thing. But even what happens if there's no women around?
That's what Rashi does.
No, fine. What happens if there's no women around at all? And you know for sure. Then you could. It's also not. So the question is, what is it? So that's what tikkun is. Tikkun is that the containers should enclose the energy. So, like for example, I'm thinking like this: when you tune up your faculties, let's say, whether through eating something, through exercise, through a medical procedure, sharpen your eyes, let's say, so that when your eyes are 20/20 and really well, they're being malbish, they're enclothing the power of vision in the best possible way. So that's all tikkun. Tikkun is that type of total alignment between Keli and Eir. Because through the manifestation, through the enclothing of the energy, I said the concealment in Kelim, the containment in Kelim, in containers, you can then benefit from it. And the Ovis, they merited to the level of Tikkun. Now he's going back now to the Ovis, to Shaddai. Because remember, now Tikkun we say, like the Tzimtzum, Tikkun is a pure combination of Hagadol, V'Hagiber, Chesed, but measured and tempered, so you have a structure that's a healthy structure. Sometimes later in Ayin Beis, in other places he brings, why is saying Gemara, that a blind person is called Saginor. Say Lashon Sagi. Saginor means abundance of light. Sagi means a lot of light. So the Samach Tzedek, I think maybe even the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab brings it. What is it, making fun? It's like telling somebody you see too much. It's like it's like Leil L'Rosh, which means like making fun. So it says no, because Saginor, that's exactly what is going on. There's an abundance of light, and there aren't the filters in the eye that allow for sight to manifest. So you could have blindness can be a result of too much light.
It's like when the eyes are dilated, too much light is going in.
In other words, it doesn't have the galde, what do they call those layers. So an eye has to be translucent, but it has to also have a filter. The pupil, all the different elements. So it's all about that type of measured flow. So this is what the Ovis was zeichet to tikkun. Da'ad Avraham hoya shnei alofim tayu. This we're going to explain why Shaddai is because till Avraham there was 2,000 years of tayu. The Gemara says 6,000 years. Shital fashnin shnei alofim tayu, shnei alofim teira, shnei alofim Mashiach. 222. So tayu v'isa dahavi koranli b'shemes nuchrayin. And it says that they would call him with names of foreign names, alien names.
Him is Hashem, yeah?
I think so. We talked about it yesterday. I didn't look it up. They call God name by names. Nochrayin is also Nochri, like a Gentile, foreign. Means Toyu, that's Toyu. Umavram hischil b'chinas atikun. Oh, I know why he's saying it. Because then you have the Shemus Nechrayin, you have Kel Shadei, and then Havaya. What was the name? He says, I revealed myself to the Avos Nish Kel Shadei. What was he revealed to before? So they must have called him different names. What names were God called before Avram came around? That's why he's bringing that. That's what I have to find out.
So what is Nechrayin?
It probably means foreign names, like Goyish names. Whatever. Not necessarily idols. No, not talking about idols. Names that were not yet the Shiva Shemus. They didn't have yet. Maybe they didn't have yet. Maybe the Elokim may have existed. I don't know what Adam would have called Kale. I have to look it up. This is a loshon from somewhere. This is an expression somewhere.
He is talking here about the great people, not the
right. We're talking here in the time. Avram hischal b'chinas hatikun, and from Avram began the level of the stage of tikkun. U'b'chinas hakelim she'islabes b'ma'er. That's the containers that them should manifest the energy. Even though this is a level of concealment and of diminishment and concealment, it's ultimate chesed, because only through this you can actually receive the gili. Now we continue here. This is what it says in Eitz Chaim, Shara Kudim, that the beginning of the revelation of containers, the emergence of containers, is in the world of Akudim. Shezau b'chinas Avram. This is the level of Avram. So Akudim. We've spoken about Akudim at length here. Remember, the structure of existence, you have to always remember that every level in Chassidus, every level in Spiritus, every level in Shtalshus comes to play a role. There's no such thing as an extra level. Just like Mozart told the Archduke, who thought he was a connoisseur of music, he told Mozart, beautiful music, but far too many notes. That's what he told him. So Mozart replied to him, he says, yes, Your Majesty, but not one more than necessary. So, every level, just like everything on earth, every snowflake, every cell is absolutely necessary. God could not create anything that's negligible. And everything has a purpose, whether you understand it or not.
Maggots.
Just like, for example, when David HaMelech was wondering, he understood the purpose of everything except the spider. The spider, and what was the second thing? There was a second thing.
People are losing their mind.
Yeah, so it came to the spider, so the spider ended up saving his life. Which is interesting. That means everything else he had figured out. That's pretty awesome. I remember they say in the human body, when we were kids, there were three things they said the human body there's the appendix, the wisdom teeth, and the tonsils. But the tonsils they used to take out from us in the 50s. Now they don't. Now they've discovered its purpose.
They shave it down, actually.
It protects.
They have a way to shave
protects some type of some immunity that it provides.
Yeah, sure.
But the appendix and the wisdom teeth, they still don't know its purpose. Right. So someone said to me, you see, you can't be a god. Look, you have an appendix. I said, you have billions of things that you know exactly what they roll, and only two you can't find. Tell me, what's the logic? That those two we just don't know yet. Why would you say these two show that all the rest are random? It doesn't make sense. If it was the other way around, that everything doesn't make sense and two things make sense, okay, fine. So the point is the same thing as saying the
Melech also understood why did Hashem create such a thing? People should lose their mind. That's also saved his life. Because when they ran away from Avimelech, Plishtim, because they said that he is the biggest enemy of you. Why you? So he made himself like his saliva is coming out from his mouth.
Yeah.
He made himself crazy. Yeah. That's what David Lishanoy says. Tamu lifnei Avimelech, vayigorshei vayelach.
Yeah. But does that really answer why there are people who have Alzheimer's, or does that only answer why people can fake it so they can escape? Because if you didn't have it, you couldn't fake it. No one would believe it. I understand. Okay. So that's why so many people suffer, in order that we should be able to fake it when necessary to flee.
Sometimes it's a bracha that has dementia.
He said it's a bracha.
Sometimes it's a bracha for the person that has it, not to realize. It's people that are very, very aware, and they're crippled, they can't move. That's
the problem is when you just only have dementia. What do you do with that?
That's what we all have.
There's that moving story where the guy kept coming to see his wife who had Alzheimer's, And as she faded, the nurse tells the guy, she doesn't recognize you anymore. There's no point that you're coming. He says, yeah, but I recognize her. That's what he said. Yeah. Yeah. If we're going to lose our minds, we should all lose it together, basically. Like, what's that story with the guy where everybody went crazy and the king tells the guy, because we may go crazy, we'll make a mark on our face. The mashal. I forgot how it goes. He says, we'll make a mark so we'll know. I forgot that. It's a funny ending. So everybody goes nuts. These two make it. Anyway.
I had a question before. You said that the Avos are in Atzilus. Now you're saying that they're in Akudim, which is even higher than Atzilus.
He just began the line. Let's see where he goes with it.
But maybe it's possible that when it says that he has that Ribui Kelim and Eid Echad, is that possible that he's talking about Akudim there?
I wouldn't go there so fast. No, it says Atzilus, so I don't think it's correct. Atzilus is Verudim.
It says Atikun.
Tikkun is Atzilus. Well, why don't you read 2 lines before? But El Atzilus u Inyan.
Right, but then he continues and he's connected to you.
But so there's no connection to the word Atzilus there. It's talking about Atzilus. It's talking about Atzilus.
Yeah, but maybe Atzilus and macrocosm, which is.
It's not. Atzilus is never Akudim. Why were you guessing when we just began? Let's see where he's going to go. It could be a higher level. It's not a contradiction.
Yeah, but it seems like a very similar type of way
the Isa Beis Chaim. So we spoke that I started saying something that all of Ishtalshalos are indispensable components of a picture. Every level. There's no such thing as a level that's not necessary. Obviously, because it's all willed. And to understand it well, you have to understand it really in the picture of Achdus. Everything is coming to create a switch, a connection. Take away that level, you could always ask yourself a question when you learn Chassidus: what would existence be like without that level? That's the question to ask. Then you're compelled to find how that level contributes to the picture. Like, big puzzle, take out this little piece, take out Rishimu, like you asked me, take out Eir, take out Kalim, take out Eragvul, Blikvul, and something's going to be effective. All the way down to our lives. It would be like, God forbid, someone said, we'll take out one cell from your cell structure. One dot in a program code. One dot.
In an address.
Yeah.
In a web address, one dot.
Yeah, but look at a program code. You can have millions and millions of lines of code and add a comma somewhere. How could I add a comma and go find it? It's like a needle in a haystack. But the point is, and second thing it's important to always remember that the structure, not only is it Achdus, it's also logical. There's a logical structure. What does this mean? Not that it has to fit our logic, because our logic, on the contrary, was created in the image of this logic, the divine logic. So God has divine logic that He implanted in existence. It didn't begin that first we understood things, then we said, you know what? That's why there's a tzimtzum, because it's like we work. No, the tzimtzum is because that's how divine logic works. And therefore it evolved that we too, when we communicate, we also need chesed and gvura. There's a critical point that I just made here. Trust me, you keep this in mind, and your whole learning of Chassidus will be different. In other words, there's a divine logic in the system. And then we were created b'tselem Elokim, so we have this system, this logic within us. And so therefore, when anything you think about, you say, what does this level do? Just ask yourself the question, what's missing here? What would be missing without it? What would happen if there was no toyu, if there was no this? So one of the key things in the structure is that when the energies begin to, I'm talking about after the tzimtzum now, the kav, the energy is still massively intense, because it's still divine energy. As much as it was diminished, it's still divine energy. So the way it works in Ishtalshul is it works in levels. Everything is levels, measured. Generally we know of Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Nasiya. But another way that's sometimes described is Akudim, Nekudim, and Vrudim. The 3 types of sheep that Yaakov tended to with Lavan. We spoke about this at length back in chapter 106 and 107, the chapters with Lavan and Yaakov. So Lavan is Lavan and Elyon, and Yaakov tended to the sheep of Saint Lavan. Is the chain from the word Yitzia? This is the words in Akudim. That the Yitzia from the Lavan and Elyon, from the supernal whiteness, as we learned, white is the interface between beyond color and color. White is like Keser. White is a colorless color. From there, Yaakov drew out Yitzhi, Etzain, Hamshachas. And they generally Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim. What's the difference between them? You're talking about spotted sheep, speckled sheep, and striped sheep. So Akudim is a spot, one spot on the sheep, which is what they say is 10 eris in one keli. Like you say, where do we find an example? The example would be a seed. Like I mentioned before, a conception of a child. You have one keli. It could even begin with one cell, 2 cells, but it's essentially a very diminished keli, and in it is concentrated everything that will come later. Nothing else will be added. It's all in there. Then comes the next stage, the kudim. Like, talk about speckled. So here you're talking now a bunch of dots, the kudim, but the energy is still so intense, so it's 10 separate. So the containers, now we have 10 containers, but they're very immature containers. They're very tender, and you have a lot of energy still. So it's not as much energy as you had in Akudim, but now you have Kalim. So now you have the real clash, and that's where the shattering takes place.
That's a Toyu.
That's Toyu, the Kudim. Then comes Vrudim. Rashi, different places what Vrudim means, but often it's meant striped. It's a combination of Akudim and Akudim, you could say, in a way. It's a combination where you have now balance. So you still have 10 energies, but the energies are diminished. The containers are more mature and developed. So now you have a place where there's going to be tikkun. This is where tikkun takes place, because there's balance. The energies are diminished enough, the containers are mature enough. And these 3 steps can be explained in a model, literally, even in education. You can have a brilliant teacher who says nothing. He says one word, no one will understand, that's Akudim. All the brilliance is in one word, but nobody gets it.
Why don't you have
in the Kudim, because there's no keli to break. It's all energy. There's nothing to break. There's nothing to. It's like a seed. It's all concentrated. Then suddenly you have a person who, like the opposite. He's so brilliant, just talks. A lot of kelim, but the energy is so much, it's all completely overwhelming. And then you have a level where the energy is diminished and fits into the container, and every container can absorb it step by step. Toyu would be like a flood. Akudim would be almost like a drop of water. And tikkun is a rainfall, a nice abundant rainfall, if you want to put it that way. Huh? That's how I would, that's one way to put it.
Why do we need the Toyu? I know I asked it before, you said it's separate.
Yeah, because you want to learn general Chassidus, and I'm learning Ayin Beis. Okay, that's the difference. So I'm trying to focus here. Trust me, everything has its place. Sometimes you answer, sometimes not. I don't want to complete, I'm going to move along here. You'll get it. Let me ask you, you know why there's a kudim? You just have a problem with Toyu? It's because I was felt it is? Huh?
Kudim, it makes sense. This is like the oil is coming closer to us. The Toyu is a shvira. Okay.
It's a good question. I've discussed it many, many times here, but remember, in an imperfect existence, a shvira can be actually the beginning of a tikkun. Seisel amnas livnis.
So he gave an idea.
Yeah.
No, I mean, sein question hat Nord. Lachatchila was auch ein Buin, also mit der Brechen und der noch Buin.
Say in English, come on. In America.
Okay, I'm going to answer the question. No. But you don't have an answer. You heard my answer, I'll tell you many times. I spoke about this. You've asked me this question. I've answered this question why they need to tell you in this class at least, in my opinion, 20 times, if not more. Yeah. No, I'm not. I don't have a problem repeating myself. There was far greater people than me that repeated themselves, so I have no problem doing it. You have to remember like this, that you always ask the question from the root. You ask me, why did he break in order to build? Well, why did he make a tzimtzum addition? Why don't you ask me about the tzimtzum? Go always back to always the culprit. You can blame everything on the tzimtzum addition. It all begins from there. Huh?
If you would have a chance to ask God one thing, you would ask him why did he make tzimtzum?
No, the tzimtzum because he wants to do it b'tachtein. That's clear.
Was? Weil da sagst du lachatchila buit in aza eifen as midav brechen zu buin besser.
Once you have a tzimtzum, you have an imbalance. An imbalance has to be addressed. There has to be someone that you have to balance the equation. You understand? Toyu balances the equation. Toyu is like a protest against the Tzimtzum.
Whoa.
That's what it comes down to. So, the Tzimtzum had a purpose, and God knows its purpose. But in reality, in our existence, the Tzimtzum created a major distortion. The concealment of reality. Right? Right. So if everything would be going smoothly, akudim, and tikkun, segeta gang, now you need somebody that is saying, no, something's wrong, and says the system is distorted. So Toyu has a very important role. It's like, without Toyu, existence would be dysfunctional and think it was functional.
Yeah.
I like that. You hear what I just said? Without Toyu, existence would be dysfunctional and think it was functional. Toyu is always reminding us. Remember, Toyu happens all the time. There's breaking of containers all the time. It's like this one that's saying, no, something is wrong. There's an imbalance here. As much as you balance, there's an imbalance.
Isn't like the terrible twos, the temper tantrums that the kids have?
Yeah, you could say that.
You need that in the system growing up.
So here he says like this now. So I just explain akudim akudim. Says cholos as galus akel was cholos with galus akelim ba akudim shezo b'chinas Avram. This is the level of Avram. Who in vayaked es Yitzchak. The word akudim vayaked. He bound Yitzchak. Liyisiskashu sa'er b'kli. That means binding. When you bind something, it's a connection. It's a binding of a container with an energy. So it says in the Eitz Chaim that the beginning of the revelation of containers is akudim. That's the level of Avram. The Avram b'gematria rachem. Avram is the gematria of rachem, which means compassion. Have compassion. V'akelim hentachlos harachim v'achesed. And the containers are the ultimate chesed, ultimate compassion and love. Like he said before. That's why Avram is called Tikkun Hiskil Hayir, because the tachlis of Chesed is Shaddai. Chesed itself, without a Gvura, is not. It can flood fields, as I said. It can annihilate people in the name of love. It's a flow of energy that doesn't stop. So it's the Tikkun, it's the balance that is the key. Harmony is the key.
Yishmael came out of Avram because of so much Chesed, right?
You didn't have it.
Yeah, it says that.
Yeah.
So basically, that's what he brought here. What it says in Eitz Chaim.
Avram doesn't seem like such a tikkun if you think about the way Moshe is.
No, because the Pettis is the ultimate.
Yeah, that's afterwards, the Jacobson. I mean,
That's all.
So, what do you want to dismiss Avram's contribution?
I don't know, he just made a statement about the Shmuel and both of them.
And I didn't react. You saw, right? Because I didn't think it was relevant here. There is the element where it says with chesed, what he's trying to say is, which is correct, that with a chesed, without gevura, can bring a yishmael. But why I didn't mention it, because if you bring it here, then you're going to get into this contradiction. There's another side of Avram that he's the beginning of the Ovis. He's not just bad chesed. No one says, just because Yotzim and Yishmael, that his chesed is, it just means, yes, that with Avram, without Yitzchak, and then, or both of them without Yaakov, is not a complete picture. So Avram is chesed of Kedusha. But Chesed Kedusha that continues going without some type of restraint, right, creates Yotzim and Yishmael. But he doesn't say that here. There's a reason he doesn't say it here, because we just confuse matters.
Talking here about how the Chesed would never happen if no Kalim. In the next line he's saying it.
Yeah. I just want to clarify the Eitz Chaim. So the Eitz Chaim is that it's akudim, and akudim means the beginning of containers. So it's true, it's not the full-blown picture, because you could say Avram, you could say the Ovis in general is tikkun. It says, it says Shnei Alofim Toyu. That's clear. The Gemara says, and then began what Torah begins with Avram, not Matan Torah exactly, but we learned earlier the beginning of the Yichud of Matan Torah. The Arizal says began with Avram. They prepared the ground. We talked about this at length. They pioneered the way. They paved the way. Avram is Chesed. This is the picture. Chesed Atzilus comes Yitzchak Gvura Atzilus. Again, I told you everything is gradations. There's a reason. Someone could say, why don't we just jump to Yaakov? He has everything. Because Yaakov is made, you don't have Chesed and Gvura, you're not going to have Teferes. So it's all, that's what I told you, everything is it's like what? Why can't we just be 20-year-old adults? Why do we have to go through the childhood? Everything is a process. God wants a logical process. It all emerges. Then it says, Yaakov is Sheshapodes Avram. That Yaakov fulfills, ultimately, he's the B'chir Shabavis. But it's like, you can't have, someone say you need 3 legs to make something stand. So someone say, okay, but the third leg needs first 2 legs. One, you need leg 1, leg 2, then leg 3.
Right.
Okay, so Avram began Lahoyer, Hiskil Lahoyer. He began to bring light into a dark world, like it says in Basar Lagani. That 7 generations that went up, 7. And Avram began to bring it down, but he only brought it down from 7 to 6. Then Yitzchak 6 to 5. And Yaakov 5 to 4. And even Yaakov is ultimately really, Moshe is the ultimate. That's what he said, Yaakov Moshe Milagav, Yaakov Milabar. So Moshe is really the ultimate. But Teferes Das, we learned this. Now, 1 second. But he's bringing out that just like, in general, he said Tikkun is the idea of Kelim. So that's what explains the Eitz Chaim, why Avram, you could say maybe in Tikkun, in a general Tikkun is Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. More specifically, Avram is Keli 1. I don't know if Yitzchak can be compared to Toyu. I have to look. I'm sure, probably not. But Gvura alone could be sometimes Toyu. And Yaakov would be Tikkun in that. But that's not a contradiction. The point is, the Kelim are the key here. Without Kelim, there's no... Shaddai is Keli, essentially. It's saying... Well, it says Kelim. I wouldn't say Shaddai is Keli. Shaddai is Eir HaGvul. Shaddai is saying to the Eir to stop. But it's basically... He's associated now with containers. He is associated with containers, actually. Not just with Eir. Till now it was Eir. Well, we'll see.
So before we have a final.
So that's why he adds now that Eitz Chaim he says that at the beginning of the Kelim, and that's Avram, because Avram is Rachim, because the Kelim are Tachlis HaRachimim. Now obviously the real Kelim emerge in Tikkun, not in Akudim, in Vrudim. But in Akudim you're already beginning to have the first emergence of a container, so you're beginning to have the dye. Now he continues. And that's what it says in the pasuk that I repaired to Avram. In the Kel Shaddai Shem Shaddai Shem Dai. Because through Shem Shaddai, which was what? That he says to the world enough, Avram, through this, Chesed v'Ava. So through Kel Shaddai, through this he appeared to Avram in a form of Chesed and Ava.
So that's Kelim. That's Kelim.
Or die. The day sheyir b'chinas gili b'chinas hachesed va'ava lamatu zeh kelim dafka. Yeah. So he's actually connecting. What's the connection of Ve'el Avram b'Kel Shaddai? That because of the Kel Shaddai, that's why there's a Ve'ela, that's why there's a Gili. It's an extra interpretation. But in order for there to be the Gili of Chesed and Ava lamata, of love and kindness and love, that through the Kelim specifically, through Shel Shaddai. In
order for it to emerge, the Chesed has to be through the Gevurah.
Yeah. Because without the Kelim, it would just continue and overlap.
But he's not talking about it.
It doesn't say yet. We'll see. He began with the Eir. We'll see where it goes. Gam inyan ve'era el Avram shenimshur boy memechuz b'chinas klei hachesed ha'atzilis. What does this mean? Also this inyan of Eira shenimshur boy, that in Avram was nimshur memechuz b'chinas klei hachesed.
He's explaining it in the next lines.
Shenimshur boy memechuz b'chinas klei hachesed ha'atzilis. That it transmitted in him from the essential personality of the container of Chesed Atzilus. The Ovis hein amarkova. The Ovis are the chariot, which means that they're completely bought like a chariot to the one that's riding the chariot. Uksiv holach v'nesei hanegba. You should go and travel south. B'midas hachesed the ave. B'midas hachesed the ave elyena ad shezochel liyas merkova l'midas hachesed Atzilus. Well, Negba is south or north? South. So Fein of Negba. Yeah, it's south of Negba. It's south, right? I did say that. Okay. What does that mean? That you should travel means you should.
He was going and traveling.
He was going higher and higher.
He was going to southward.
South is higher and higher.
No,
he was going south. South is Chesed.
He was coming from the north and he's traveling.
It refers to the level of reaching to the level b'midas hachesed va'avel yen ad shezoch li is merkava l'midas hachesed l'atzilus.
Up in the sense it's hot. It's closer to the sun, closer to the source.
Yeah, I understand. That's why I know. I also understand the south. U'mamidas hachesed nimshur b'chinas pnimis klei dechesed lislabish mamish benishmas Avram ha'meira begufei mamish. And from midas hachesed was transmitted literally from the inner container of chesed to manifest mamish literally in the soul of Avram that radiated within his body mamish. Avram was essentially embodied chesed. That's what he's saying here.
Sefer Boyer, it says.
Right. Be'era Avram. So I'm just trying to think. Sefer Boyer says that after Avram was created, he says, "What do you need me?" Chesed Atzilus. But one second. But what's the gam in Be'era Avram? Okay. In other words, that he actually is not just. Okay, the first taich is Kel Shaddai. Through Shaddai, you have the real Av and Chesed. The second one is that Av and Chesed actually became Avram. So Ve'ela Avram be'Kel Shaddai, that I reveal myself into Avram. In Avram, he's an embodiment of Chesed. It's a deeper. That's what he's saying here. By Inyan who the Inyan of this is Kedisa Be'etz Chaim. It says in Eitz Chaim Shar Mem Aleph Pei Gimel. B'Pirashav V'Seinam Merkava. He tempers there in Gate 41, chapter 3, and explaining what means the ovis are the chariot. That there's a small, very small spark. This is brought by Yechida. This is Yechida Sheba Nefesh. So this is the classic description of Yechida. So basically there are 5 levels of the soul, 5 dimensions: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. So here's how the Eitz Chaim explains Yechida. He says, let's go over this slowly. There's a small spark, very small spark. Think of a small spark coming out of a big flame. This spark is divine, a divine level. Nimshach, it comes from Achrei Sheba Beira. Madrega Achrei Sheba Beira, from the lowest levels of the Beira. So think of the Beira in this case is a large flame. From an edge of that flame comes out a spark that's pure divinity. Well, let's just read the Eitz Chaim. We'll explain in a moment. And this nitzes, this spark that came out of the lower levels of the flame of the Beira, manifests and encloses itself in in one spark that's a creation. So think of it like an Slabish B'Keyach Nitzutz Echad Nivra. What does the Koyach mean? This is a very, very refined state of neshama. And this spark, which is called Yechida, meaning one. Yechida means one and alone, a singularity, a unique entity. In it is the root of the 4 levels, spiritual levels, which is called Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya. So this is how the soul essentially was so-called crafted. There's a flame of the Beira, which releases from Achreina, from the lowest level of it, you get a spark, which is Mamish Alakus. This spark manifests. I'm sure here B'Keyach means it means in the power of one spark. It doesn't mean in potential. It doesn't mean that. No, it doesn't mean that. No. In the power of one. So in other words, there's 2 sparks going on. There's a divine that manifests in a so-called created entity, and this is called Yechida.
And this created entity has like 2 levels.
It sounds like an Eir and a Keli. That's what it sounds like. Let's see where he's going with this. Okay, let's see.
But the Yechida is already not the Neshama. This is already, I don't know how to call it.
Shemesh Nikrolo. Chamesha Shemesh Nikrolo. But he's not going there right now. He said that earlier. Now he's speaking here, the Nitzutz. This Nitzutz is Yechida. Is there something higher? Maybe. We're not talking about that. Okay.
Maybe the Neshama itself is like a Chelek Lekam.
I don't know what.
We've heard that before.
Was this the Nitzutz not a Chelek Lekam?
No, now he's saying it's Mislabish when it's a Nivra.
So does a Chelek Lekam Mislabish when it's a 7 Nivra. So it's the same thing. This Nitzutz sounds to me like Chelek Lekam. That's the Chelek Lekam.
is higher than Yechida.
Does it say that here?
Neshama is higher than
You see, you're bringing in other ideas. It doesn't say that here. Here, if you read this, it doesn't sound like this is the highest. It's Mamish Beira. What's higher than Nitzutz Beira? You have a question from other things you've learned, right? Not because. So I would go. It's called the Pashat Malach. Let's read what it says here completely. Let's understand it, and then we can go back. The Ayin Beis himself talks earlier that Yechida is lower than the Etzem and Neshama. So you're asking what's Etzem and Neshama, but first I'm trying to understand what this is. Then we'll figure out what Etzem and Neshama is. I don't know what Etzem. Maybe he won't. I don't know. Yeah. Let's see. So Benitzin says, we got it? So that's how the soul begins as a spark, basically, from a larger. Okay. Now, by the way, to say Madrega Achrena, you could ask, what does that mean? The lower, there's no higher and there's no lower. So we have a whole chapter earlier where he speaks how Malchus the Ein Sof is also B'chinas Achrena. He doesn't mean Achrena as lower. He means as doesn't have all that's there before. When you say lower there, you mean like you could say Got is Alta, but Alta is Nish Got. You could say Hu Mekeme Shalom, Ve'en Elam Mekeme. So you could say that, for example, this is an energy that comes out of the divine, but it's not all of the divine. So that would be called a B'chinas Achrena. That it's one dimension of it, so to speak. Okay. V'hainu keneshama idal b'chinas naran chai, I'm sorry, chai yo. It's in the shom, right? Naran nach, right? The neshama is 4 levels: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai. Sheindal b'chinas chachma, bina, v'zun. So malchus is nefesh, za is ruach, bina is neshama, and Chochmah is Chaya. And elsewhere it says the Chaya is the level of Makiv, the Hainu B'chinas Makiv HaKorov, which means a Makiv Korov, like we say Arich of Atzilus, let's say. Here Chaya is a Pnimi, a Chochmah. Sometimes Chaya is the outer dimension. No, Bina is Neshama. Chochmah, Bina, Za, Malchus. That's the 4. Elsewhere explains that Makiv is Makiv HaKorov, she'esh le'achiza b'pnimius. That has achiza, it has some grasp on pnimius. Like we learned earlier, that Arich is closer to pnimius. But Kol HaGilul, Arich is the Sheirish HaNetzalim, the root of the emanations. V'chol HaGilulim de Nefesh Ruach Neshama, and all the levels of Nefesh Ruach Neshama. V'hein Maha Makiv the Chaya. So Makiv the Chaya is like the Keser, the lower Keser of the Keser, the Makiv HaKorov, that is the root from which the other 3 Pnimim emerge. Okay? We learned this before. Remember the 3 levels of Keser? She said the lower level of Keser, Zah, and Malchus of Keser becomes the source for the Pnimi. So that's what he said. That's what we have now is the 4. So Chaya, everyone understands what I'm saying here? Think of it like this: this Pnimis Dika Keiches, the inner faculties, the 10 spheres, are usually Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Neshama is Chabad, Ruach is Chagas, and Nehi or Nehim is Nefesh. Usually, here he began a little differently. He said Malchus is Nefesh, Midas, which means Zah, Chesed through Yesod is Ruach, Bina is Neshama, and Chochmah is Chaya. Then he says elsewhere it says that Chochmah is Arich. I'm sorry, that Chaya is, he doesn't say Arich, he says Makiv HaKorov. Then the next 3 would be the Keches Pnimim. So it's basically 2 ways to explain it. So he's going out to the
Makiv HaKorov Suton with Pnimim.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. That's why Chaya, look, so Naran Hagiluyim, the Naran him Makiv the Chaya Al Shem Zen Nikla Mazel. And that's why Chaya is called Mazel, the Mazel of the Neshama. Mazel. Al Shem Shenazel v'native ba Neshama shebeguf. Because it's nasal v'native, it drips and what would be nasal and native? Nasal is dripping,
like when a candle
flowing, melting. Okay, bottom line is nasal comes from the word. It's like transmitting, but not in a direct way, like from a pipe. It's more like a drip, like a drip or a trickle,
like a nasal drip.
Yeah. In the Neshama Shebeguf, which is within it. So when we speak, for example, let's go back just to make clarity here. When we spoke, remember, Keches Pnimim is the 10 faculties in 10 containers. That's usually Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. The Keches Pnimim. Chai is usually Rotzen, and Yechid is Tainug. Chai is Arich, and the Yechid is Atik. He's not using Atik and Arich here exactly, but he's saying basically the same idea. So basically, Chaya would be like Rotzen in that case. So it hovers, and it is from there come the Keches Pnimim. That's what he just said here. Okay. But then we have the other interpretation. Remember that Chaya is also Chochmah. 1 second. Ubchinis Yechida, and now Yechida, who shadish dal Ubchinis Hanal. Yechida is even higher. The root of all these 4, including Chaya. Hakalelas kulam kedimyan iskalas Chochmah bina v'zuan ba'arech hamfin. Okay. It includes all of them. As an example, Kedimian, like the scholars of how Chachma Bina, Zoh and Malchus are all in Arich Hampin. See, now he's using Arich Hampin on Yechida. It depends how you interpret. If Chaya is Chachma, so then no problem. Yechida is Arich Hampin. If Chaya is Makif HaKorev, you say Yechida is the higher level of Arich Hampin or Atik. He's not clearly speaking here two paths.
He's not saying that Arich Anpin is Yechida. He said the same way that Arich Anpin is Keil Chachma Bina.
Yeah, but right, okay, yeah. He's very technical here. Let's see where he's going here with this.
Seems like the levels of Kesser we were learning before that were really Arich and Yud.
And it's explained in Eitz Chaim the Shazel Kedimian Chemer Harishan. This is like the Chemer Harishan, which is the first raw matter. Shapashat Mekol Tzuda, that's unshaped and free of simple free. Pashat also means
Pashat is Giton.
Is unclothed, not unclothed, unshaped, undefined, from every shape. Mechol Tzura, V'hu Hanesa Kol Adalat Tzuras, and it carries within it all the 4 tzuras. Of what? 4 tzuras? Eish Ruach Mayim Ofer. So the way it's explained in the Rambam, this is based on thought as it was then. Chassidus brings it. There's a Chemer Hiyuli. It's similar like with a seed, God created Bereshis Bara Elokim, He created everything in day 1, right away. And then it says every day, that part emerged. So the way they explain it is a Chemer Hiyuli, which is a raw piece of clay, think of it like that. Like in a sense, like how God created Adam. He took earth from everywhere, right? And then blew a soul into it and shaped it into a human being. He crafted it. So the same thing is, all of existence begins with a Chemer Hiyuli, what they call like the Big Bang today. Yeah. You can say, it's all raw matter. The God particle. And it encompasses in it all the shapes that will come out of it, and there are generally 4 Yeseidas, 4 elements. And we say Yeseidas, remember, people ask the question, today's science does not talk about 4 elements anymore. So the Rebbe has in letters that 4 elements can be 4 archetypes. Doesn't mean 4 fire, water, wind, and earth. It means 4 personality types. Archetypes. And interestingly, I think one letter I once saw the Rebbe said that even in an atom, you have a neutron, a proton, and an electron. So electron is Eish. Neutron and proton compared to other 2, I'm not sure which is which. And then today we know there's also a 4th element. There's a fourth element in an atom, and maybe even more. But the point being here,
how can science stand that they are not existing? This is a fact.
No, that once in Greek philosophy, Aristotle, and the Rambam takes from there, the way they saw the whole world was that there was raw matter, and there was 4 main elements: fire, water, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Fire, water, land, and earth, and air. Even in, by the way, in Chinese, Chinese is also similar. But then, anyone you go to Basic Science 101, so they have the table of elements, right? And there's like 105 elements. Oxygen, hydrogen, they're not made out of those 4. Right. Right. And elements today are made out of molecules. And molecules are made out of atoms. For example, water is classic. What is water? H2O. So it's seen somewhat, but you look at this Greek, they got to water, but they didn't realize water itself is made up of elements that are similar to other elements in fire, for example. So that's what I'm saying. That's why I brought it into the picture, because you still can talk about 4 archetypes, even if they break into more details.
Wir haben das von the Greeks, the 4.
Steht nicht in Chumash. Wo steht es? It's Medrash. But the Rambam, like Kiddush HaChedesh, he says he takes from.
I think it is finished in the beginning. In the Ashur Pokim.
Yeah, but who nimmt es?
Rambam nimmt es von Kaviochel von See, von Aristo.
I don't know if Sefer Yetzirah may be mentioned. Yeah. No, I agree. I didn't say he took it solely from them. That was definitely the predominant science of those times. That's all I'm saying. It was the predominant science. And yes, they're probably a Medrash. Eish Ruach Mayim Ofer is in quite a number of places. From Avram, they say.
Okay, so
No, I just said it was not a contradiction, that's all. So bottom line, he's going back to the Eitz Chaim. So the Eitz Chaim says that Yechida, the Chemer, is like the Chemer Hiyuli. It's like the Chemer from which comes the four images, what here is Chaya, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Ruach, Chaya, and Nefesh. So there it's Chemer Hiyuli, that from there comes Eish Ruach, Mayim Ofer. The Eitz Chaim makes this comparison. He's trying to explain Yechida now. So Yechida began as the spark. Then it becomes, as a spark, as it joins the Nitzutz Nivra, it now is a chem, like the raw matter, that from it now come the other levels of the soul that are more shaped. Right. That's how he's describing.
As it joins,
you're not going to find many often. In the Kutta Teda he brings this Eitz Chaim to a few places, but there is very detailed here. I know most people have no idea how the soul, there's a science, there's an anatomy, a dynamic of how the soul came to be. There's a process.
The anatomy of soul.
Remember, we were created B'Tselem Elokim. I go back again. Every detail is part of a big picture puzzle. God took earth from the ground and put a soul into it. So there's a process. The soul too went through a process. So when we say a soul is made up of Atzilus Sheba Neshama, there's B'riya Sheba Neshama, Shama Shenasata Bi Taherihi, Ata Barasa, Ata Yitzata, Ata Nefachta Bi. What are these levels? Yechida is Atzilus, that's Chaya, usually Nesata Bi, Neshama Shenasata Bi Taherihi is usually Nesata Bi is Yechida, Taheri is Chaya, and then Barasa, Yitzata Nefachta is Naran. So, you have this...
Body is made of, I read, the body is made of three, and blowing in the Shama support the Ruach.
Okay.
When it's joining Nitzutz Nivra, that's not a Keli, it's still its own soul.
I don't know how he's going to explain it here. I'm not sure.
It's all part of the Shama, so it's not Keli there, it's more...
But a Keli Lifi Erech... yeah.
Right?
Okay, so he says, just like and in this nitzut zeh called Yechida manifests what? The small spark, which is mamash alakus, pure divinity. Al derech hislapshus b'chinas atik ba'arich ampin. So you see, so he's teaching Yechida as arich, and atik is the nitzut beira. Al derech this manifestation of atik and arich ampin. The atik hu b'chinas tachteinu shebe ein seif. Like that was the achreinu shebe ein seif. So atik is the lowest level of ein seif. U'mislabish ba'arich, and it manifests in arich shu reishu mokar hanatzolim. That is the head and the root, the source of the emanations. That's why he teaches Chaye Chochmah. Verstehst?
He's talking about Atik Datzilus.
How many Atiks are you familiar with?
I don't know. In a higher, you could go even Lifnei Tzimtzum, no?
You can go where you like. Where do you want to go? Where would you like to go to?
No, it's the same idea. It's the same spiel.
Is this a mathematical question?
No.
Or a Vedic question?
So we ask mathematical questions.
That's
That's how our brain works. The co-part is a linear, logic.
I said this many times, I say it again. Yeah. The whole existence is a microcosm, macrocosm. But Derech Klal Chassidus talks, Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiyah, it's the Skarbova Atzilus B'ri Yitzir. The one that hangs around 770 in the mikveh, the one that we know very well. Then there's a whole other dimension, the way it's Lifnei Tzimtzum. I'm just saying it sarcastically, because frankly, we talk like, Lamates Malachas, Eses Sviris, Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiyah, Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim, the Kav, the Teyu and Tikkun, Ak, Lifnei Tzimtzum, Sherish Ha'er, Habligvul, Atzmus. I just said all, it's one night, right? Now we bring it in a plate, and you can have either like chont. Now what I just said, what did I just say? That's how we speak about it. Like a bunch of levels, and that's all in one.
That's how we think.
Everything I said now would require lifetimes to go from just one to the next level. You're talking here completely different worlds. So, if you want to know the mechanics of it, yes, there's 5 levels usually. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. There's 5 worlds: Asiyah, Yitzira, Bria, Atzilus, El, Mesa, Ein Seif. You can call something. Sometimes you call it the premium and makif is Eses Firis, and then you have Makifim Keser, which is made up of Atik and Arich. That's the general structure, all the way in the root. Generally, we speak about it in the world of Atzilus. Sometimes he speaks about it, here he interchanges it with Atzilus, and sometimes Atzilus the Klolos. Familiar? Atzilus the Klolos is how it's before the Tzimtzum. So it says in Eitz Chaim that L'mayla Ma'ak was Ke'ein Atika. And in Eitz Chaim he says there's a Me'ein of Atik higher than Ak. So really, it doesn't really matter because we're trying to understand what it means.
Let's see further where he goes.
Yeah.
So the Madrega Achroina Shebebreira,
Let's see further, maybe he's going to say.
is this talking about Adik Datzilus?
Why not?
Because you have much higher Madregas. You're talking about what the Yechidah is, that Madrega Achroina Shebebreira.
Well, some Maimonim it says that when you talk Atik Atzilus, you're talking about all the levels. Everything is included. Everything higher is in Atik Atzilus. Think of it like that. U'kamaykim b'chinas nitzutz katan hu alakus mamash b'chinas hakelim da'atzilas she'en alakus mamash nivra behen v'al yadam. U'kamaykim b'chinas nitzutz katan hu alakus mamash b'chinas hakelim da'atzilas. This is very dense here. And the same thing is the nitzutz katan, which is alakus mamash b'chinas hakelim da'atzilas.
As opposed to the nitzutz katan of the neshama?
Yeah. Because in Ageres HaKedesh she says like this, that God is one with His energy, one with the containers, and it's through the containers that He creates Yesh Ma'ayin. The transition is a pretty big jump here, because he's speaking about the neshama, and now he's suddenly saying the nitzutz katan is alakus that comes from the kelim da'atzilas, because they're in the Ageres HaKedesh, and he says misham nifradu v'yatzu neshamas. Because I see what he's saying. Now I got it. Okay. Hold on. Yeah. In Ageres HaKedesh, she says, where do neshamas come from? So she says, neshamas come from the kelim of Atzilus, which are mamash alakus, which are defined, which are one with the divine. Mehem v'yadam, through the kelim, God creates. Kelim are basically God's instruments. So a neshama comes from there. So he's saying that the root of it starts with Atik, is the nitzutz katan beira that manifests in nitzutz katan nivra. So nitzutz katan beira would be Atik, it's the lowest part of Ein Sof. That manifests in nitzutz katan nivra, which is Yechida, which in turn empowers all the lower levels of Chachma through Malchus, like I said, Naran Chaya. Now he's saying, more specifically, this nitzutz katan comes from the containers of Atzilus, which are mamash alakus livrei behen,
which is lower than Atik. Now he's talking about kelim da'atzilas.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. He's talking now how I think.
You see the next few lines. He's saying how.
Only that they can. I'm telling you, he's speaking the same thing now on a lower level. That's what's going. Only the containers are called a lower level of the beta, because they confine the flow of energy. It's all coming to explain Shaddai. So he began by bringing the Eitz Chaim into the picture, explaining why the Ovis are the Makova. Remember, that's how he began. She's a nitzutz katan ma'id. So there's a nitzutz katan ma'id, that's from the Beira. Okay, so now he's basically two ways he's explaining it. One, it's Achrein is Atik, and that manifests in the nitzutz Beira, Nivra, in Arich, and all the way into all the. But that's all like an Eir more. Then there's another level how it's in the containers. The containers of Atzilus are what express the divine power. That would be the B'chinach Achrein Shebebeda, because they confine the energy. The Yisavos Ma'ir v'Akelim Rak Magbilim, because the actual creation comes from the energy, and the containers only confine it. That the nivra should be in a form of a yesh, of a substance. That's why the containers are called the lower level of the Creator. And this lower level of the container manifests in the nitzutz, the spark of Yechida, the root of the four levels of the soul. I have to look in Eitz Chaim, and I want to look in Ageres HaKedesh to really see if I'm missing something here. But I would say right now, based on what I'm reading here, they speak about this in two levels here. And I think the reason he's saying it is because you see, a neshama, we have a dilemma here. A neshama has two aspects to it. One, it's a divine force. But on the other hand, it does manifest in some keli. Even a neshama has a keli. The fact that it's called a neshama. It's not just called Eir Ein Sof. It's a neshama. we're not talking about now individual neshamas. We're talking about the general neshama. Let's say the neshama klolos of all souls. Question is the dynamics. What makes a soul a soul? So yeah, we say easily. We learn Tanya. It says it's a mamash. It's a divine piece of the divine. But that's a broad statement. How does that actually? What are the specific dynamics? So the Eitz Chaim says it comes from Tachteina of Ein Sof, which manifests in Nitzutz Nivra, which in turn becomes the dimensions of the soul. So, broadly speaking, that is Atik, Arich, and the 10 levels of Atzilus. But more specifically speaking, what he says in the Geras HaKodesh is that because the Neshama also manifests in a container, it's from the containers of Atzilus that all this is happening. And the lowest level of the containers, the container is now called Tachteina Shemabeira, and that manifests makes a yesh, which is Bria, and there you have all the levels of the Neshama. So he's talking two levels here, how it's, I think, on the source, and then how it's on lower level.
He's not saying it's Bria.
He says, look, he says, Nivre b'chinas yesh. In the Geras HaKodesh, he says, Livre behen v'al what? Yesh ma'ayin, Bria. He says there clearly that the Neshamas come from there. Because talking about the Neshamas, how they come into Bria. That's why I want to look it up, but I'm sure that's what.
That is an aspect of the Neshama Atzilus when God asked about creating the world, and He asked the Neshama Tzadikim. There's an aspect that they were always there, so to speak. Way higher than this.
But they weren't an existent entity.
He asked them.
So what do you think? So there was more than God around. So different explanations given for that. That's not a contradiction. Remember, there's only one God.
I'm not saying it's a contradiction. I'm just saying they that aspect.
Well, who says maybe that's this level? Tachteina of Ein Sof is pretty good level. Atik.
Saying Kelim Atzilus, not even low.
Fine. That's also a pretty high level. They're all high levels from my point of view. They're higher than higher than me.
It's from Atzilus, not from Bria.
The neshama. Well, look in the Geras HaKodesh. You'll see it says what I said. V'zeh ve'era b'kel Shaddai, and this is what it means ve'era b'kel Shaddai. The b'chinas primis hakelim, from the inner dimension of the containers, nimshach hanitzutz lislabish ba'avos, from the inner dimension of the containers of Atzilus. Like he said, that became part of Avram. Avram is mamash chesed. Nimshach hanitzutz, from there, from the primis hakelim came the spark and manifested in the patriarchs in Avram, b'chinas chesed Atzilus, v'Yitzchak b'chinas gvura, v'Yaakov b'chinas hatiferes. So we say Avos and Merkava, the Avos, are actually the manifestation of Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes of Atzilus. From Primis HaKelim comes a spark that manifested inside of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to say that.
That's a level of brooding.
You see, because Chesed, Gvura, Atzilus don't exist in Atik. So how does it get on? How does it become a neshama of Chesed and Gvura Tiferes? That's from the Primis HaKelim of Atzilus. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
So it transferred itself from rooting to Atzilus?
Vrudim and Atzilus are the same thing.
Now
They're always the same thing.
What did I mean? I meant
Akudim.
From Akudim to...
Akudim was just, he's explaining how sometimes Avram is called the level of Akudim. What's the con? It's different, because the containers begin there.
He's connecting the oil to the container, to the Kelim. That's why it's a Akudim. He said it before.
V'zeu ve'era b'kel Shaddai, Shem Shaddai b'Atzilus v'yina kelim shemagbilim misa'er. He says clearly Shem Shaddai is the kelim. This means ve'era b'kel Shaddai because Shem Shaddai in Atzilus is the union of containers that confine the energy. V'anitzutz kotten shememuchus ha'kelim heir b'gilim mamish b'nishmasim. And the small spark that comes from the, that's what he says here, yeah, comes from the essence of the containers radiates in a revealed way, literally in their souls. What is the Shem Shadi in Aveda? Who mashakos b'mishpat v'zdaka b'Yaakov ata sisa. You've done judgment, justice, and kindness with Yaakov. Mishpat v'zdaka b'Yaakov ata sisa. The tzedakah who midas chesed. Tzedakah is the midah of chesed, love. Shemitzad midas hateva chesed hu mischased el mazulus. because he has a nature of goodness and kindness, he does kindness to others. He's kind to others. That's mitzvah chesed. But in charity, in giving kindness, there's also a participation of the attribute of compassion. Because tzedakah is also l'hachis ruach shvalim. It's not just to help someone; it's also to give life, to revive the spirit of the fallen, the spirit of the crestfallen, of the people who are fallen down, and that comes from rachamim. As it's known, the difference between love and compassion, the chesed, kindness, shaykh rak l'chol adam lis chasadime. Kindness is capable of every person you can give chesed to. You can help anybody. You can be kind to anyone. Compassion, empathy, is possible only in someone that is in a fallen state, a needy person. Someone who's already on a level, on any level, doesn't need compassion. Rather, it's only on a shuffle, on a fallen down person.
Is tzedakah called rachman or is it called chesed?
He says the shtatfus. It has a participation of rachman. This is also the difference between gemilas chesed, gemilas chasadim and tzedakah. Gemilas chasadim like a loan, or when you're being kind to someone, and tzedakah and charity. The gemilas chasadim who bein lani and bein la'ashirim. The Gemara says gemilas chasadim is both to the poor and to the wealthy. Tzedakah hu la'aniyim dafka, and charity is only to the poor. So gemilas chesed is chesed, and tzedakah is also the element of rachamim. And through charity below, you've drawn down from above midas chesed. That's the extension of energy, of light and energy, and life, of energy and life. And this is also with the cooperation, with the combination of the midah of compassion, lahachis, to give life, to sustain, or to revive, or to to imbibe lahachis, to bring alive, revitalize the spirit of the fallen. Canal. What? Oh, hagadol, yeah. What does that mean? That when you do tzedakah below, you awaken the chesed from above. That also compassion should be coming down, even to the lowest worlds, even to, in other words, to the poor and deprived. This is the b'china of gadol, hagadol v'hagibur. Remember chesed. This is chesed.
Chesed. But now we do tzedakah. We just said it was rachamim.
Yeah, two levels here.
No, but you said gemilas chasadim was chesed, and tzedakah was more rachamim to give the needy. So that if you're giving to the needy and you're giving to tzedakah, so why does it bring down chesed, not rachamim?
Yeah.
Why? That's my question. Why does it bring down chesed, not rachamim, when you're giving to the needy? You're doing rachamim down here.
It brings both. It draws down both.
It draws down your lower.
It draws down both.
Omnam tzedakah mishpet ksiv ba. However, it says tzedakah mishpet ksiv ba. Mishpet shetzarich is mishpet b'tzedakah. Sheyishpet esasme min hamesus shalei. It's not just enough to give, even in giving to those that are needy, but you also have to judge. You have to measure min hamesus shalei from his so-called excesses. This is the primary thing of tzedakah. The primary thing of tzedakah is not after you fulfill all your luxuries and everything you need and beyond, and all your so-called excesses. Then you give whatever is left over from your excesses to the poor. That you should judge yourself. We're not talking about giving your bread to someone, but anything that you're giving extra, don't wait till you first fulfill all your needs and then. But from that you have to measure. In other words, tzedakah is really
what you need, and then the rest you give away.
Right.
The rest you give away.
One second, he's going to go on. The Chazal say your life comes first. Hu ke'ein ma'isa shahaya b'kishin shel mayim. That's like the story that was with the kisin, the
jug of water.
The jug, kitin shel mayim, the jug of water. Dahainu rak ma shenemuchrech loy. So what does the Gemara say?
Kitin shel mayim, he had only one jug.
And brings it out Tanya.
It was not enough for both of them.
He has to take it for himself.
He will die.
Right. So it says chayach kein. You have to dahainu rak ma shenemuchrech loy. So because what it says there, that's not the tzedakah because that's what's necessary. You're going to die without it. It's only one jug of water.
Then you like it.
That doesn't. So then, yes, you can keep it. Then the tzedakah is not first chayecha. First comes your life before someone else. So what's the mishpat? The mishpat is anything extra than what you need. We're not talking about necessity. Not there's only one jug. That you should indulge in all the pleasures, and your chaver, your friend, should die for hunger, God forbid. Is this a lashon somewhere?
Yeah, it's an Alter Rebbe brings it down. And they get us, and he asks for tzedakah for the Niyat Yisrael.
Mom, is this lashon?
This thing.
I'm saying, is it from Chazal?
The Kitin is from Chazal.
Yeah, but the other half.
No.
No. So therefore, that's Daka Mishpat. So Daka Mishpat needs Mishpat that you should not start giving after you've completely filled your full. And another element of Mishpat is necessary, that when there's an abundance of Hashpah, you have to judge and measure yourself. The things that are permissible. Not sure what this means.
I don't know if it means Mutarim.
About
Meisim again, because that's the Chain. He said that before.
Before he said that you have to give.
Amazing.
Meisim is a okay, Dvarim HaMeisim. Okay, I understand. You're right. The Dvarim that are extra, but he said this before. What's the Chain?
No, it's Dvarim u'Mutarim. וכן גם בריבוי יש פה. Not only to give, but to בריבוי יש.
That's why you think.
Madgish the minion. Whatever.
לא, מהדבורים המותרים.
יקום דום מותרים עליי.
בטח יש וגן רשעים. בטח ארץ וגן רשעים.
שישפוט את עצמו מהדברים הנוספים, העודפים. אוקיי, חבר'ה, ספרייטיק.
I'm not sure what this means. What's the chain? That's the question. He just said all this. Chain gam b'riba hashpah. So this is the dvarim hamutarim. Okay, let's see. And now again, just like your tzedakah below brings down God's compassion and chesed, the same thing, the mishpat that you do with yourself. When you're giving, through this, L'mayla is also tzimtzum v'gbola ba'esh, ye'be'evin kazeh she'yeh hisavas anevroim b'chinis mitzias, v'yenu anevroim la'eriyas baruch she'zeyin ha'gvul she'niz boyer. Ha'giber she'niz boyer, sorry. Yeah. So in other words, so both elements in Aveda exist. The girdle from God exists, which is God's extension you have to give. And you have to give not only to give also Taniyim, that includes the element of Rachamim, and then there's also the element, the other thing, that by you judging yourself, in other words, measuring in the appropriate way, you're also drawing down from above that God's hashpah should also come in a way that you can contain it, and we should be able to benefit and enjoy it.
If you restrain yourself, Hashem will restrain himself.
So then we have a gadol, a gibur, and a vedish in his baraliyah. Or kumayken b'chol savedisad. The same thing is navedisad. L'tzantzim esatzim lich b'shruch tavosov. This is the in of tzimtzum gvura. So besides just measuring yourself in tzedakah, that you kavish, you control yourself, you restrain yourself, and you conquer. You subdue the spirit of your desires. Says shalei b'spashur s'rach the ashadai. Zavzon genug taivus. The hest. So shalei b'spashur s'rachvus. Being yonim chachumrim, that there shouldn't be more extension and expansion in the crass matters. Kim adraba, on the contrary, yichpe sasmei b'chol protin yonev, he should subdue himself, he should control himself. The intention should be toward heaven. Like for example, when we eating and drinking, the intention should be in order to preserve his body. Should have a healthy body in order to be able to learn and daven. And automatically he will be careful from extras, from excesses, that are just there to fulfill his desires. And he'll be satisfied only with what is necessary and with the above intention to do it for learning and davening. Through the restraint that you control yourself and you restrain yourself, through this becomes the expansion of the containers above. Because what you see, by you restraining, you're building containers to contain, to stop. So you also create the kelim above that they should restrain and limit the flow. That they should be able to receive the energy. It's a beautiful taich and kfiyah. Instead, his kaf Shaddai in your Aveda create Shaddai Lamaila Shem Leilum Dai. Va'ov Shem Makava Hayo Kol Avraham Kadeshim Umuvdal Minyonei Elam. And those who were this chariot, all their organ, all their limbs were holy and separate from and detached, apart from. They completely disconnected from material things, the world. Till all their physical things were mamish alakus. So by them radiated this core spark that we spoke about. That's the etzem of the level of Shaddai. And that's why all their matters were divine. And every person, this is by the Ovis. What is it? And every person who is the restraint and the control in his spirit. Through this becomes the confinement. This allows that the air should also be received and contained in the creatures, that they should be able to benefit from this divine energy. So you see, Shaddai therefore is all limit, nitzutz cotton. It's a limitation of things. That's basically, we're going to have to learn this again. This is a little deep. Kitzur, will be the Inyan.
Upstairs, the limitation applies if it's limited upstairs and makes more containers. More than will apply to you. You get more because of upstairs. Otherwise, you just get a general. It makes it so it's shaykh to you. So you give down here, you get from upstairs to Shaddai.
Right. If you give in to your types and let everything extend, then the flow is uncontrolled, right. Basically undisciplined.
Right. So cool.
Right.
Wow.
Kitzur. Means discipline below creates discipline above.
So what is the Amshach of Matan Torah? This is the Amshach of the Ovis.
The next 30, 40 pages.
Yeah, that's we get to that. Yes.
Ubira Inyan Dehine Ovis Siva Era Bekel Shaddai Shamar Leilam Dai Leilamai Dai. Is a summary now. He says to his world's enough. This is the divine reflection that comes from Chesed. Gili B'Pchinas Bligvul. It's on its own. It's a revelation that's infinite. V'Amar Dai, and he says enough. Aydei Midas Hagvura, Hagadol Hagibur, and Dai is the Midas Hagvura that says enough and controls, restrains the flow. And the root B'Chinas HaTzimtzum Shenisha Reshimah. The root is the Tzimtzum that lives at a Shimu. The Shimu looks like a Shaddai. The intention is that there should be an abundance of containers through which the energy should be received, absorbed. That's tikkun. The Ovis, the patriarchs, they merited tikkun. That means containers that manifest within them the energy. That's the key. Eidos bekelim. And their souls radiated the personality, the inner personality of the inner containers. This is the inyan of this small spark of Yechida that comes from the Losham B'chinas HaKreinish of a Beta. That's the lower level of the Beta, the Creator. That's the level of Kelim. See, clearly he says it's Kelim. So it's rooted in Atik. And that's Ve'era, that they say Gili Amahus, Ve'era, I revealed myself to them. So the Mamash had the revelation of the divine itself. Ve'inyan Shem Shadeh Ba'aveda, and Aveda, what Shem Shadeh, in Mishpat V'Tzedakah. Shadeh Kfiyah, through restraint, through forcing yourself, through coercion, Hoisach V'Sakem L'Kabel Sa'er. is the expansion of the containers to receive the energy. I never heard this before. In other words, usually you think of kfiyah means the discipline of creating containers in your life.
That's the keli.
That's the keli that you can receive the air.
Yeah.
If you behave undisciplined, there's no containment.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So we'll stop here. We did the end of chapter 130, pages 251 through 253, the end of Maimer 32, Vasisa Chag Shavuos.